From your world news headquarters on the World Wide Web, it's time for your daily dose of sanity. This is the Meria Heller Show. Meria Heller is a published author, founder of the Universal Wheel, a lifestyle and philosophy based on our interconnectedness to all living things, a Reiki master, and delivers the news with spiritual views. How many intuitive news decoders, animal rights activists, and vegetarian broadcasters are there? Just one, Meria. Meria has provided independent news for a smart audience for over 13 years now on the Meria Heller Show, available at meria.net.
meria.net.
And now, here is your host, the mouth that roars, Meria Heller.
Good morning, world. Meria here, alive and kicking. Hope you guys are doing great. As promised, I've got a great guest for you today on a book that's absolutely amazing, and I know you're all going to want to read it after today's show. But let me tell you a little bit about my guest. His name is James Hufferd. He has a BA in History, an MA in International Studies, a PhD from the University of Minnesota in Geography. He's taught in numerous colleges and universities. He also has a website you guys can check out, 911grassroots.org. So he is a 9/11 truther, without question of a doubt. But today we're going to be talking about his book, which I love. It's called Troublesome Country, Why We Need to Live Up to Our Creed, A History of War, Injustice, and Greed. And it's real true history of the United States. And I can tell you, I've actually found quite a few surprises in it myself. So without further ado, good morning, James.
Well, good morning, Meria.
Welcome to the show.
Well, glad to be here.
I have to tell you, as a person that gets 1 million books, sometimes I feel like I need a shopping cart to leave the post office. I was very pleased to see that your book is 140 pages and is so to the point and so easy to read and so fact-filled. It's the way I think every book should be, because today most people don't have time to read 400 or 600 pages.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Mm.
One of the interesting things that really caught my eye reading this, and it is a really good history lesson from beginning to end, because I love the way you take us all the way through the beginning of this country through where we are now, was something that I read. I think it was on page 72, and I looked at that and I said, oh my. And it was the Supreme Court case that was decided in 1886, Santa Clara County versus the Southern Pacific Railroad, which basically says that that was already, at that time in 1886, corporations were ruled as legally persons, possessing the same rights as people. When everybody thinks that the Citizens United and the Supreme Court now has first given them personhood. And I have to tell you, I found that pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So basically, corporations have always had that right. Is that true?
Well, I don't think right at the beginning, but I think more post-Civil War, they seem to just take off like gangbusters, and of course they were owned by the richest people of the time, and so they were able to exert the power that basically we see today that early, with the robber barons and so on.
Mm-hmm. Now, your book is about America's creed. Okay, I don't think that a lot of people even know what America's creed is. Can you describe it?
Well, yes. I kept hearing that such and such an action was really against our creed, and we hear that every once in a while. It really is that sort of un-American, whatever that they're talking about. And I thought, well, what are they talking about? What is the creed, and do we have? Is it possible to formulate an American creed? It would take. Well, I defined it myself. It would consist of tenets that an overwhelming majority of Americans subscribe to, and I thought, well, is this even possible? We're so divided. Could there be things, a number of beliefs or propositions that, let's say, 97% of the population of the country would subscribe to? And I sat down at my kitchen table and I came up with the first four right away, and then later that afternoon I thought of a fifth, and I haven't honestly thought of any, or nobody suggested any additions to the list since. Not that that's impossible, but it hasn't happened. So I take my list as being the American Creed, and another amazing thing is that the way that I defined it. Well, let's see the tenets of the creed, the five tenets. I didn't define them or recognize them in these terms, but it turned out, and I noticed this right exactly when I typed the first page of the first draft of the manuscript, that I thought, well, how could I state these even more succinctly? And I realized, and I just about fell over, that the way to suggest to state them more succinctly was as followed: one word: democracy, freedom, equality, justice, and independence. Mm-hmm. That's the American Creed.
Right. Well, you look at the American Creed: democracy, freedom, equality, justice, and independence. And you look at America today in 2014, and I don't see any signs of any of them.
Well, the rest of the book, after stating and defending that would be America's creed, and if you can add on to it new tenets that an overwhelming majority of people would subscribe to, go ahead, that'd be great. But until you can do that, I'll take those five. But the rest of the book after that point is going through the history of the country, and I started actually way back before Columbus and up to the present, and see sort of generation by generation, how did we do in living up to that creed, to those five tenets. Mm-hmm. And what I found was that we almost invariably did exactly the opposite of what we said we believed.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I mean, when you look at America today, it is the total opposite for sure.
That's absolutely right. And so my theory is that if American citizens overwhelmingly became aware of this creed and what it says, and it wouldn't be too hard for people to memorize. They don't have to memorize really 5 words. Then if we challenged ourselves to live up to that creed, and we held our government to account, and when they messed it up, we pointed it out and insisted that they get things straight and that they not break the creed, then I think that most of our worst problems would straighten out.
Right.
I really do.
Right. Well, when I got your book and I started reading it, and on that front page where you have the American Creed written out, mm-hmm. I actually wrote in the column, good. This is good. This is good stuff. But then I look at those 5 words and I see democracy, and we live under an oligarchy.
That's right.
You see freedom, and we've had all our freedoms removed through the NDAA, through the Patriot Act. Equality, women still striving for equality. Gay people still striving for equality, and in a lot of cases, black people still fighting for equality.
Absolutely.
Justice.
American Indians.
Right. You look at justice, and all we see is a system of injustice, where now we have something new called affluenza.
Yeah.
Where the rich get off and the poor go to jail forever, and independence, We don't have any independence. To me, independence is very similar to freedom. And it just so happened, James, I don't know, I'm sure you've seen the movie, Easy Rider.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I chose to watch it again last week. And it was made in 1969. And there was a very poignant speech that Jack Nicholson's character is saying around the campfire about freedom. Now, this was in 1969 where the hippies were being ostracized and beaten and murdered. The peaceniks. And he says to his, I think it was to Dennis Hopper's character, he said, and he's an attorney in the movie, he says, we talk about freedom in this country. He says, and everybody loves the fact that we say we're free until you start living like you're free. Then they get angry and then they attack you.
Mm-hmm.
So, is freedom just a word?
Well, I'm afraid that, I think deep down there's a belief in it, but there's too much that too many people are afraid of to actually exercise it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, I've interviewed people like Mordecai Vanunu. He was locked up in Israel for 23 years for being a whistleblower on their nuclear power plant in Dimona. And a lot of that time he had been in solitary confinement. And I remember one of the questions I asked him were, how did it feel to lose your freedom? And his answer was, I never lost my freedom. He said, they only imprisoned my body. They couldn't take away my mind.
Yeah.
So how would you describe freedom?
Oh, well, let's see how I did describe freedom. That would be freedom. Okay, here's how I described it. Now, see, my definitions are kind of specialized. They're kind of, I made kind of amorphous propositions more succinct so that I could play off events in our history against these particular propositions. But in the case of freedom, it's freedom to control the government. This is the idea that the direction of the government should be freely determined by the people.
Right. Well, you can see we have no control over it.
And then there's no, well, okay, now that, actually, I take that back. That's democracy. That was the definition of democracy. My definition of freedom is freedom from governmental control. This is the idea that the government cannot legitimately control the people's behavior, at least as long as we do not harm others in our common free perception, endanger ourselves. In other words, when TV commentators tell us what we believe, they're taking away our freedom. I mean, we should believe what we believe, and we should perceive what we perceive, and not have them tell us what it is in advance.
Well, how do we rate, when you look at the United States today, how do you think we rate before the rest of the world?
Well, you always hear that the United States is the freest country in the world, and that's supposed to be, just unanswerable. That's just the way it is. Well, I'll tell you, I've lived in Brazil, and I was just as free there. I think people in Canada are just as free as we are, in Australia, and many countries in the world, and probably in Britain, they're probably just as free as we are. We may be a notch down the scale in that so many programs are just foisted on us without our permission in this country. So I don't know.
Right. Well, when I look at where we are on education to the rest of the world, economy to the rest of the world, even maternal death rates to the rest of the world, we come in pretty low on the Richter scale. Pretty low. We seem to be dragging behind everybody else.
Well, we seem to be these days.
Now, where do you think this idea of American exceptionalism, which I know I was taught when I was in school, America's the best, we only do the, great things for everybody else in the world, and, we're number one, we're number one.
Yeah.
Where do you think this idea of American exceptionalism came from?
Well, I look at American exceptionalism as a control mechanism that we're supposed to believe that and not question it, and then whatever reports we get about what our government or what corporations, prominent citizens have done, we're supposed to say, no, I don't think so. That's un-American. They wouldn't do that.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I think
Well,
that's what American exceptionalism is about.
Right. Well, I'm sure that you heard the expression, and God knows I was accused of it after 9/11 for asking questions. People told me I was un-American, I should leave the country, why don't you get out of here if you don't like it, unpatriotic. I mean, it went on and on.
Well, part of my family disowned me for the same reason.
Wow. Sometimes that can be a good thing.
And I lost 3 college teaching appointments over it, too.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't go around, spouting 9/11 all the time, but when we had an event, I put up posters around where I taught, and there were some complaints, I guess, from some parents and maybe some students. I don't know. Mostly not, but there were some that just couldn't countenance that.
Right. Well, you and a lot of other professors, so many people that I've interviewed, that really suffered. I mean, really suffered in their personal and economic lives because they questioned the official story.
Yeah.
But to me, those are true patriots. I think that's our patriotic duty.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not to cry, but I'm still suffering from it. That I'm retired without a pension, just on a little Social Security, and I'm hoping that some of your readers or some of your listeners will buy my book. A little bit here.
Well, I think this is a history book everybody should own because it's simple. It gets to the point. You're going to learn everything you need to know through the centuries of America and decade by decade. And if people don't know our true history, they're just going to keep falling for anything this government throws our way.
Sure, that's what they're counting on.
Right, and that to me is very dangerous. I remember, I think it was either Rumsfeld or Cheney, when they were talking before 9/11, it wasn't a matter of if this is going to happen, but when it's going to happen. And it makes me worry what's next.
Well, that's right. That's why we got to know, and we got to stand up, and we got to say, well, even with this business in Ukraine, we got to stand up and say, whoa, wait a minute, who really started this? Your version of it doesn't really make sense. That it was the CIA in there that prompted this overthrow, and then just a bunch of hoodlums take over, and so they're immediately declared the legitimate government, whereas there's an election in Crimea that nobody can really find any fault with, that 97% wanted a certain outcome, and they got it. And that's declared illegitimate. Right,
by an illegitimate president.
Yeah,
I mean,
well, okay.
When you look at, I have to tell you, James, when I started this show, the biggest story of my life, I thought, was going to be covering the stolen election of 2000 here in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had no idea that story would be paled by every story since. But who are we to ever tell another country that their elections are illegitimate when ours are and probably always have been?
Well, we're the elephant in the room. I guess we can tell anybody anything, or they think we can anyway.
Right. Well, I really enjoyed the early history that you have in the book, the later history, believe me, I enjoyed that too, especially the 60s, because that's when I was really growing up. But reading about Manifest Destiny, which to me is so insane, it's almost as crazy as people in the UK still believing people have the right of kings to rule because of their bloodline. I look at how crazy people were in those days and how easy it was for everybody else to believe it. And when you look at, a prince gets married or, the princess gives birth and all the big to-do that goes on.
Absolutely.
I'm stunned that this can happen in 2014. And I say, God, are we evolving or devolving? How stupid are people? But,
makes you wonder.
Right. Do you think that Manifest Destiny was also connected to American exceptionalism?
Oh, sure, absolutely. The American Indians were demonized, that's for sure, and it was they weren't. It was said going to make good use of the lands and resources, and so it's in God's plan for us to go and get them out of the way and start putting these resources and these lands to work.
Right, and at the time it was really the people benefiting the most was Britain.
Well, that's true. That's true. And as long as during the periods when they had control of the banking system, that was right. Yeah.
Well,
but again, it resulted in a genocide.
Well, this nation was founded on genocide, and that's something a lot of people don't want to hear.
No, well, that's right. That's why we don't practice the creed like we should.
Right, and then I'm trying to think. I'm looking through your book while we're talking. I think it was on page 10, where I think it was Van Sertima that said the shaping of the New World, it appears, must be left exclusively to Aryans.
Yeah.
And when I look at that, I thought about Hitler and his Aryan nation.
Sure.
And I mean, what is it about white people that makes them think they can just dominate all other races?
Well, I'm ashamed even to have to say this, but Hitler's ideas basically came from this country, from the what do you call them, the eugenicists and so on.
Right.
Yeah, and of course he was bankrolled. He was bankrolled by the big bankers in the United States. I mean, they had a stake in his success and in his taking over and his program. And I think they wanted to see how it would turn out, to see if they could do it here. In fact, during World War II, during the 30s, there was this coup attempt against FDR, and what the plotters had planned, who were the big business people and the bankers, was basically a Nazi regime, a fascist regime. And they even openly said so.
Right. Well, one of Hitler's favorite Americans was Henry Ford. He helped him figure out how to mass produce murder and IBM. And you look at all the American companies, and you look at the grandfather of a president of the United States and father, Prescott Bush, being basically a Nazi supporter. I often wonder, how is it no one ever brought out the Nazi connection of the Bush family when George Sr. and Jr. were running for president?
Well, they did, but they were murdered. Hatfield and so on.
Oh, that's right, Fortunate Son. What a great book that was.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I believed, had Americans known, or even I knew, I don't think any American would have ever voted for a Bush.
Well, you wouldn't think so. I like Jesse Jackson's warning, stay out the bushes.
Stay out of the bushes, that's right.
Yeah, he's right.
All right, so let's travel back. Now, we have people today who honestly believe, and we hear it all the time, James, that we are a Christian nation. Now, to me, the word Christian is a verb and not a noun. And I don't see any evidence of real Christianity going across this country.
Well, I don't see much of any either.
Now, a lot of them say that our forefathers were Christians, but everything I've read and known, they were not. Jefferson didn't see any use for Christianity.
Well, I think they were mostly freethinkers like me, actually.
Right. I think they were brilliant men. And when you look at, and I think Jefferson even annotated and made his own Bible out of most of what, he thought was basically BS in the Bible.
Yeah.
But I remember his statement, that he didn't see anything useful about it. One of the other things Jefferson said, basically, I'm going to surmise it, was that what goes on in other countries is none of our business. And that if they actually wanted democracy, we should lead by example and they should come here and ask us to teach them.
Yeah.
And yet here we are, bringing freedom and democracy to the world with drones and bombs.
Well, we know that has nothing to do with the real reasons.
Mm-hmm. So let's get back to the times of manifest destiny, the times of the Constitution. A lot of people have said, and I have to agree, that the Constitution, and you also, say it in your book, literally favored rich, well-born, well-bred white men.
Mm-hmm.
So today, the Constitution, of course, has become like it doesn't exist, but we still like to believe. It's like we want to believe in fairy tales.
Well, I think not everybody's going to agree with me, but I think that the Constitution is a workable framework. It's not perfect, but it's highly workable as long as we, the people, are actually flesh and blood people with a pulse and the body temperature around 98 degrees, and not corporations.
Right, but when you look, especially you look today, and I'm sure you're aware of the Koch brothers and, all the big billionaires, they pretty much own the country, and look how easily they can sway people to be on their side with their Tea Party movements,
that's right.
The Bundy Ranch situation, which was, another rah-rah, sis, boom, bah.
Yeah.
And people really haven't got a clue that, you have the most evil people behind all these movements.
Well, my idea is that people say that, we need to get back to the Constitution, and then you ask them, okay, what in the Constitution do we need to get back to? And they have no clue because they don't know what's even in the Constitution. But the Constitution was enacted to put into practice originally these 5 tenets of the Creed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really the foundation of the country, is of the idea of America is this creed that we don't live up to, and so we become a nation of hypocrites saying one thing and preaching one thing loudly to the rest of the world until they're sick of it, and then doing exactly the opposite.
Right. And again, just so the listeners can beat it into your brains, democracy, freedom, equality, justice, independence.
Yeah.
And it's easy. Do you think that at any point we did live up to that creed in the past?
No, I think that, I don't know, let's see, I suppose, I don't know when we came the closest to it. I think this is one thing that I pointed out, because this is one thing that my research for this book revealed, was that we've never lived up to it. We've never really lived up to it. I think that the founders were, for the most part, idealistic, but at the same time they were political pragmatists, because they wanted these traits for themselves, but they found out in trying to deal with their peers in Britain at the beginning of the Revolutionary era, when they thought that they could, it was just, to quote a phrase, common sense, what they were asking for, that their peers in Britain, the well-connected British aristocracy, would agree with them and say, sure, well, yeah, you're right, but they were treated like scum themselves, and they found out what that felt like, and they decided to rebel, but they couldn't do it just by themselves. They needed a substantial part of the population of America to agree with them and to support them, and so they had to offer these same principles to everybody. You see what I mean?
Right, but they didn't really offer them to women. They didn't offer them to Indians or Native Americans.
That would be absurd, wouldn't it, from their point of view?
They didn't offer it to slaves, and there was plenty of slave trade going on.
That's right. But there is some evidence that people like Jefferson thought that as the country progressed, that we would be more and more ready to extend the circle to include more and more groups and people. I don't, I couldn't argue strongly for that, but there's some evidence of it.
Right.
I'm sure you're enjoying the information you're hearing on this episode of The Meria Heller Show, heard internationally at Meria.net. Did you know that Meria does 4 shows a week and has over 1,000 hours of excellent informative shows on her site? Maria's been at this for years, and you get the benefit of the best education anywhere for a subscription of choice. Your subscription gives you total access to the entire site, the archives, and the new shows, all without any commercial interruptions, thanks to the show being supported by those who appreciate the truth. The site's available 24/7, and all the shows are downloadable for your favorite device. Enjoy the second half of this show and then come over to Meria.net, that's Meria.net, and pick a subscription of your choice. It's a win-win for all of us. Now back to this excellent show.
Okay, welcome back. I'm speaking with James Hufferd on his excellent book, Troublesome Country: Why We Need to Live Up to Our Creed, A History of War, Injustice, and Greed. Real history. Check out his work at 911grassroots.org. There's a live link here for that as well. Some of the things that I was reading in your book, which were really amazing to me, because it seems like, I always say, gee, what's left to learn? There always seems to be plenty.
Oh, yeah.
When you talk about the Pilgrims and their Pilgrim New England as being a man's world, it surely looked as though women were treated as possessions with absolutely no rights.
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I said, okay, and it wasn't until, 1920 that women got the right to vote behind black slaves? Black slaves got the right to vote before women?
Yeah.
And you look at today, we have this war on women and women's rights that we fought long and hard for. It just seems to be getting worse and worse. Why do you think this is? Is it just like inborn in our DNA as Americans?
I think it's a pushback. I think that it's reactionaries trying to get back to some kind of a golden age or something when men were men and women were glad of it or something.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with religion, too.
Sure, you're right.
When you look at forcing Native Americans, to become Christians, to walk away from everything that was sacred to them.
One thing I find of interest about, let's say, historical inaccuracy is that there's a movement, it's a small movement on the right to actually defranchise women today and go back to when men ran the country, and it's supposed to be a macho thing, and yet the first place in the United States where women were given the right to vote was Wyoming Territory, 1869. If that isn't macho, I don't know what is.
Right. But when you look at, so many lies that we were told as kids, I think about the history as we were taught in school. I think I innately knew they were lying to me because I was just bored to tears during those classes. But when you really understand the real history, back in those days, if you killed an Indian, you were considered a patriot.
Sure.
I mean, they actually encouraged this. And, what about white supremacy? I mean, has that always been part of our society?
Yes. Yes, that one's easy to answer. Absolutely, yes.
Mm-hmm. And, we can jump around and look at, we mentioned earlier eugenics. There are sterilization programs that are still being revealed that were going on in the United States well into the 1970s and 1980s.
Yeah, that's true. And probably there's some now. We don't know. Well, I mean, I don't know what's in. I don't get my flu shot now, I always ponder whether I should or not, and I always decide that, well, I don't know what's in it, and I know that with the one particular strain of flu that was ballyhooed a few years ago, it's going to be a pandemic, and it turned out that the reason that was put out that way was because some manufacturer that was making the antidote to it he was a big political donor.
Right.
That's the only reason.
Well, they all reward themselves. I think of Michael Chertoff after 9/11 and his connection to those body scan machines that they installed at all the airports.
Well, do you know where Donald Rumsfeld first became prominent in the business world?
Well, with aspartame.
Yeah, he was the father of aspartame, which basically is rat poison.
Exactly, and people are all putting it in their coffee and tea.
That's right. He got that approved by the Food and Drug Administration.
Well, you can look at, I'm sure you saw the story out of the Ukraine, that Joe Biden's son got a big oil deal contract there.
No, I hadn't seen that.
Yeah, and now they're saying it was just coincidence.
Yeah, sure.
Well, what are the chances that the vice president's son's business would get this huge oil contract in the Ukraine?
Well, what are the chances that Bush's brother would have been in charge of security at the World Trade Center before 9/11?
Right. Well, they want us to believe these were all coincidences.
Well, some coincidence.
Well, you can go back, you can go back in history to, the assassination of John Kennedy.
Yeah.
All the things he stood against as soon as Johnson got in power, Johnson gave it all the red light. Let's go. He green lighted everything.
Yeah, that's true. Yes, that's true. Kennedy was actually going to kick the Federal Reserve out of the way, and the government coin its own money the way the Constitution says it's supposed to, and he actually had some of the bills printed, and the first day that Johnson was in office, he reversed that and put the Federal Reserve back in charge.
Right, and Kennedy also wanted world peace. That can't ever happen.
No.
He didn't want Israel to get nukes as soon as...
No, and he blocked the false flag Operation Northwoods and so on. There were a couple others that he said no way, and that made him unpopular with the brass.
Well, he also wanted to destroy the CIA, which was a big mistake that they ever formed it in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's for sure.
But what amazes me now when I see all these other wars we have going on the planet, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Ukraine, why do we have the FBI in those countries? I thought the FBI was a domestic group.
That's a great, appropriate question. I don't know the answer to that. how they justify that.
And of course, we did get caught with our hands in the cookie jar with, our favorite mercenaries groups already on the ground in the Ukraine.
Well, that's true, and we're backing Al Qaeda in Syria.
Right, but most Americans don't know that because, as you cover even in your book, we don't have a free press.
Oh, no way. Well, we have a sort of the equivalent sort of a free press on the internet if you can sort it out.
If you can sort it out.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been here for 14 years. I can't believe it myself. And it always still amazes me when people say, how come I never found you before? So it's not like, there's any corporate dollars that's going to say, hey, everybody should check out the Meria Heller Show because she's actually telling the truth.
Wow.
But we also live in a country where people don't want to hear the truth. You yourself said a lot of your own family members gave you the door over 9/11.
That's right.
And that's something a lot of my listeners have told me as well. They get ostracized for even questioning it.
Well, I said to my sister, I said, well, do you want to see some of our DVDs and see what some of our evidence is? And she said, no, I don't want to know that.
Right. Well, to me, whether you want to know or you don't want to know, I'm sure there were a lot of people living in Japan who didn't want to know about nuclear danger.
Sure.
But Fukushima blew, it's still blowing, and guess they know about it now. Yes,
but there's I understand from what's his name, James Corbett. He says that there's a big propaganda push in favor of nuclear power in Japan again already.
I know. Well, because you know the expression better than anybody as a historian. If you don't learn from history, you're going to repeat history.
Well, most people don't know any history, unfortunately.
Well, I can tell people they can learn it all in this one small book. I was like blown away. And this is a book, by the way, James, that I will keep in my library as a reference book.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment. And I'd like to just insert that the best place to buy this book is on Amazon.com. You can find it under the name Troublesome Country or under my name, James Hufferd, Hufferd. And I have some other books on there that you're welcome to check out too.
Well, I checked that out this morning because I will have a link here directly through Amazon so people can buy the book.
Fantastic.
And while I was there, I posted a review for you. So it should be live on Amazon by the time we're done with the show.
I'm excited.
I don't usually have time to post reviews, but your book certainly deserves it.
Great, thanks. I needed to hear that.
Well, good. And anybody else that reads it, go in and post a review because it makes a difference. I didn't think it did, James, but a lot of times Amazon will send me notes. Your review helped one person, or somebody else has a question on your review, and I'll always take the time to answer it. So it does make a difference. I do want my listeners to know, because there's just so much time we have to talk about your book on this show. This book is going to take you through the 20s. It's going to take you through the 60s. You're going to learn about USS Liberty if you don't know about it by now. Vietnam, you'll go into the Franklin cover-up. The Oklahoma City, the World Trade Center 1993, which I think was practice for 2001.
Absolutely.
All the way up to the present. But most important, James, is here we are. We understand what our creed is, and I really agree with you. I think every American feels that and believes that in their soul, that we are a country of democracy, freedom, equality, justice, independence. And yet, we've never lived it. We're so far removed from it now, it makes the Roaring Twenties look mild. Yeah. What can we do about it? Because what I get from you is we need to live up to it. Well, here we are, what are we, 350 million strong in this country now. What can we as Americans do to demand that our creed actually be enforced and part of our life?
Well, my only answer to that is that we all Americans need to know it. They need to be able to respond to what is the American creed, and I don't think it's too hard for anybody to learn that, and then they need to put it in practice themselves. For instance, if you live in a suburb and there's a black family moving in, it may lower your property value by a couple $100. Well, just forget that. It's much more important to welcome them and to treat everybody fairly and equally. And then we need, once all Americans have learned about the creed and how powerful it is, we need to stand up every time that there's something that doesn't smell right that the government is doing. We need to point it out that this violates the creed. This violates this tenet 3 of the creed, and we want you to stop it and get that into the discussion.
Right. Why do you think people think that they're powerless?
Because it's practically nothing that the government ever does has anything to do with what people want the government to do, and what people want the government to do, the government seldom does, so people feel powerless. It doesn't matter which party is in power, the result is pretty much the same. They don't listen to us, and they don't take the public's view into account even.
Right. Well, a lot of recent reports have been showing up in the news about the fact that the rich truly do control our government and that we have no representation.
Absolutely. The constituents of the government today are corporations and the super wealthy campaign contributors. They're not flesh and blood citizens. Mm-hmm. We need to return campaigns to the citizens and not let people like the Koch brothers, they could give maybe up to $5,000 or something, same as anybody else. It wouldn't be unfair to them.
Right,
but
exactly.
That's it, draw the line.
Well, to me, what really grinds my gears is the Supreme Court. We don't elect them. They're there forever. You can't get them out of office. And it looks to me like they certainly are pushing a corporate agenda when you look at all their recent
Well,
rules.
I think, this is, not everybody's going to agree with this either, but I feel that the New World Order and the people way at the top, way above the Bilderberg Group, are actually the puppet masters, and our government and virtually all other governments in the world are puppet regimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I agree with you there, and believe me, a lot of my...
They pass down the directives, they get things done, and unfortunately, what we want as people, or what would be good for us as people, is just either incidental or else they're opposed to that.
Right, it doesn't seem to matter to them.
No.
And I remember having Catherine Austin Fitz on my show when she was doing her Take Your Money Out of the Big Banks campaign. And she said, and I remembered it so clearly, she says, you know what, you could be protesting in the street, you could be doing whatever you think is going to work, petitions or whatnot. She says, but if they have your money, they don't really care.
That's right.
So I think...
Right. And one point I did want to get to is that this fifth tenet of the creed, which is independence, that the biggest enemy of our independence is the Federal Reserve, because it's the ownership of it is international. A lot of it is in England and Europe, and we depend on them for our. If they want to give us more money to work with, we have more money. If they want to tighten the reins and we have less money, and people lose their jobs because there isn't enough money, and things cost more, and we're dependent on them. We're not independent.
Right. Well, anybody that seems to want to take on the Federal Reserve doesn't do too well either. I'm thinking about Ron Paul. That was one of his campaign things, was to investigate the Federal Reserve.
No, we're not really supposed to know about the Federal Reserve, and especially we're not to debate whether we want that kind of an arrangement or some other kind of arrangement. That's taboo. You can't talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote an opinion piece and tried to get it in the statewide paper here a couple of years ago, and no way, they're not going to publish it. They're not going to get people talking about the Federal Reserve and what its effect is.
Right. Well, join the club. I used to write for one of the local papers in my town, and as soon as I wrote an article about 9/11, they kicked me off the paper.
Well, yeah, I'm not surprised.
Didn't publish the article. Said it would put too many people in town in a state of panic. Well, and cause civil unrest. And I'm like, what? I'm like, everybody else is covering 9/11. I said, so even in a small town, the censorship is there.
That's exactly what they told the early abolitionists. So whenever they spoke up, there was I point this out in my book, that there was a series of debates in Cincinnati, started by students of a local college in the early 1830s, and it started a big riot in the town. You can't talk about abolition. And that was even in the North. That was in the Free State.
Right. So it makes you kind of wonder,
yeah,
how much have we really moved forward in this country?
How much have we?
It looks like we're moving backwards at the speed of light.
Yeah, how much have we moved backward? That's the better question.
All right. Well, James, I do want to thank you so much for sending me your book and writing the book, because I think this is a book even teenagers could get through in an afternoon.
Oh, I think so.
And that's an important thing, is we've got to educate young people, especially people born after 9/11, because they don't know any other America.
That's true, yeah.
And that frightens me for the future.
Well, yeah, I agree, and I'd just like to say that I greatly enjoyed researching and writing this book, and I hope that it gets people talking.
Absolutely. Well, James, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Certainly welcome. Thanks so much for the opportunity, Meria.
You're very welcome. Take good care now.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
James Hufferd, his book again, Troublesome Country, Why We Need to Live Up to Our Creed, A History of War, Injustice, and Greed. And that pretty much is the true history of the United States, just those words. But remember, the creed was supposed to be democracy, freedom, equality, justice, and independence. And I don't know about you, but I don't see too much of that happening in this country. Anyway, that's today's show. Tomorrow, Dave McGowan is back on the show for Sending the Clowns. I got a copy of his book yesterday. Yay, Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. So you're going to want to stay tuned. I do want to thank everybody for supporting the show. As I always say, even this fabulous author, truth telling does not pay very well. So support people that are real patriots and real citizens of planet Earth. And I really liked a lot of his suggestions. Just if you're waiting for the government to fix things, it's not going to happen. It's up to us, each and every one of us. So again, thanks for listening and supporting the show. And I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Thank you for listening and supporting the Meria Show. Tell others what you learned today. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when it's shared. Encourage others to subscribe today. www.meria.net. Often imitated, never duplicated. A world of information all in one place. www.meria.net. Always ahead of the curve. Always on your side. Get active or get radioactive. Subscribe today.